P. Diddy leaves the Metropolitan Detention Center jail in Brooklyn. New reports say he was taken to the hospital for a few hours last week to get an MRI. We're just now learning about this, though, because Diddy was taken from the jail late at night, actually using the cover of darkness to keep his trip on the down low. So what do we know about this trip? We're going to go through everything we know so far, plus a little more. We're actually going to sit down with Dr. D. Wayne Hendricks, a former corrections officer and deputy warden at MDC, the very jail Diddy's being held at right now.
The moment Diddy stepped through those steel prison gates, the world he once controlled disappeared. Gone were the flashing lights, the cameras, the entourage, the power. In its place, concrete walls, iron bars, and the echo of footsteps down endless corridors. The same man who once demanded respect from everyone around him now found himself surrounded by people who didn't care who he was, what records he sold, or how many awards he'd won.
Criminal one, too, that Diddy or his associates would drug the victims, rape them as part of what he called freak-offs, and recorded it. He then used that recording as blackmail to force the survivors to keep quiet. But let's just keep in mind, all of this is alleged at this point. Diddy has already pleaded not guilty to his federal charges. But just last week, we actually got some new info about those charges in a superseding indictment. To start with the very basics, the feds now say Diddy's alleged sex trafficking scheme dates back to 2004, whereas in the original indictment, it listed 2008. Here's what it says, quote, "From at least in or about 2004 through in or about 2024, Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Diddy, PD, Love, the defendant, and others, known and unknown, were members and associates of a criminal organization, the Combs Enterprise, or the Enterprise. Members and associates of the Combs Enterprise engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other activities, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice." This new indictment also ups the number of victims. At first, only one victim was listed in the indictment, which some believe is Diddy's ex-girlfriend and the first person to file civil suit against him, Cassandra Ventura. An updated portion of the superseding indictment reads, quote, "Combs and other members and associates of the Combs Enterprise wielded the power and prestige of Combs's role at the Combs business to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs's orbit, often under the pretense of a romantic relationship. Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims, including but not limited to 3 female victims, victim 1, victim 2, and victim 3, to engage in commercial sex acts." The new indictment got a bit more specific in all of this too, doubling down on the allegations that Diddy took victims across state lines and sometimes even internationally to sexually assault and record them. The feds explained all of this too, writing, quote, "Combs subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse to cause the victims to engage in freak-offs and other commercial sex acts. Combs maintained control over his victims through, among other things, physical violence, promises of career and financial opportunities, granting and threatening to withhold financial support, and by other coercive means, including tracking their whereabouts, dictating the victim's appearance, monitoring their medical records, controlling their housing, and supplying them with controlled substances. During and separate from freak-offs and other commercial sex acts, Combs, among other things, hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims, at times by their hair. These assaults often resulted in injuries that took days or weeks to heal. Following the assaults, Combs, with the assistance of members and associates of the enterprise, frequently worked to conceal his misconduct by offering to provide medical assistance or other financial benefits to the victims. A different part of the indictment reads, quote, "When employees, witnesses to his abuse, or others..."
The mogul, he was just another inmate. And that realization hit him harder than any sentence the judge could have given. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. News travels fast behind bars, faster than in the outside world. The guards knew who he was, the inmates knew who he was, and so did the ones who weren't exactly fans. From the moment he arrived, Diddy became a target. The same fame that once protected him now made him vulnerable. The arrogance that once defined him was replaced with something new, fear. Because inside, no amount of money or fame could buy safety. On his first night, the tension was already brewing. Prison insiders later revealed that as soon as word spread about Diddy's arrival, rival groups started making plans. To them, he represented everything they despised: wealth, privilege, and the illusion of power. One former guard claimed, "It wasn't a matter of if something would happen,
he was being kept in a place where he's safe and not be used as some sort of way that some inmate may want to just move their street credibility, for lack of a better term, by just saying, yeah, I went after P. Diddy because, he wasn't supposed to be doing those things and all that." So it's a very difficult situation when someone that famous and well known in this kind of case is put into general population. So it's going to be a major concern for the institution that is holding them.
Now, let's take a look back at the timeline leading up to Diddy's arrest and the allegations that led to Diddy's indictment. Shocking federal charges brought against once beloved music icon Sean P. Diddy Combs now could be his complete fall from grace.
I mean, it was only a year ago that he got the key to the city here in New York. And now here he is indicted in the Southern District, right? So what happened in a year for someone to have fallen so far?
But what led up to these serious federal charges? We're talking to criminal defense attorney Adam Conta to break down the timeline leading up to Diddy's arrest. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law and Crime News. Now, starting off from where we're at right now, Diddy faces 3 federal charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. So how did we get here? We have to head back to the 1990s, when Diddy first rose to fame after creating the record label Bad Boy Records that represented artists like the Notorious B.I.G. or Biggie Smalls. It was during this time frame that Diddy allegedly sexually assaulted multiple women in New York. We first learned about these allegations in November of last year, when Joy Dickerson-Neal and Liza Gardner filed separate civil suits against Diddy. Gardner says her assault happened back in 1990 when she met Diddy at a work event. She alleges he raped her and later choked her to the point that she passed out. The next year, in 1991, Joy Dickerson-Neal says Diddy raped her while she was a student at Syracuse University. She says Diddy even recorded this alleged sexual assault and passed the tape around to other people. So these things allegedly happened in the early 90s, but they're not made public then. As the years pass by, Diddy's career just keeps on gaining steam. By the late 90s, Diddy himself begins putting out songs, even snagging his first 2 Grammys in 1998. But the following year marks the next stop on the Diddy timeline, the New York nightclub shooting. 3 people were shot, though no one suffered any life-threatening injuries. Diddy, the rapper Shine, and a man named Jamal Barrow were all arrested, and so was Diddy's then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but both Diddy and Shine went to trial. Diddy was acquitted, but Shine was convicted on charges of attempted murder and criminal possession of a weapon. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, in recent months, there's been allegations that Shine took the fall for Diddy, and on top of that he forced J-Lo to carry an illegal weapon. All of this leads us into the new millennium, though. A woman, only identified as Jane Doe, says Diddy raped her in 2003 when she was just 17. In the lawsuit she filed last year, she included pictures of herself at Diddy's recording studio in New York. From there, we fast forward to late 2005 or 2006, when Diddy met Cassandra Ventura, who would later...
For a man who lived his entire life surrounded by bodyguards and luxury, prison was the ultimate nightmare. The noise, the hostility, the constant threat, it was relentless. Diddy tried to keep a low profile at first, but there's no hiding a face as recognizable as his. Inmates taunted him through bars, shouted his lyrics in mockery, threw insults that cut deeper than he expected. For the first time in his life, Diddy couldn't control the narrative. Then came the night that changed everything. Reports later described it as a brutal confrontation that left even the guards shaken. According to inside sources, tensions had been simmering for days. An argument in the cafeteria, a few choice words exchanged, and then, violence. Witnesses claimed a group of inmates cornered him near the showers. What started as verbal taunting quickly turned physical. The screams echoed down the corridor before guards could intervene. When they pulled Diddy out, bruised and shaken, the entire block went silent. It was a message, a warning. Fame meant nothing here, status meant nothing, power meant nothing, Behind those
55 letters of support in favor of Combs to the judge. There are also letters from each of his children, with the exception of his daughter, who's a toddler. However, his youngest daughter's mother, Dana Tran, wrote a letter of support. So did his mom, his sister, the mother of his daughter, Chance, too. So will the judge side with the very man whose motto was once bad boy for life come sentencing? Well, his defense team sent the judge nearly 200 pages of reasons why he shouldn't be kept behind bars. Some of the reasons include the jury, which, if you remember, some jurors made headlines themselves over the course of the trial and even after. For example, juror number 6, who was dismissed from the case after prosecutors were concerned he made inconsistent statements during the jury selection process about where he lived. Then another juror experienced health issues, putting a halt on the trial for a day after he experienced vertigo on the way to court. Then there was the alternate juror, who didn't deliberate but still told CNN he would have came to the same conclusion. Even though the juror, who only went publicly by the name George, didn't go into the deliberation room, he still sat through every single day of trial, even being one of the few people in the entire world to see the freak-off tapes. But he told CNN's Laura Coates the sex tapes weren't as graphic as expected, saying it was pretty tame. It was a lot of rubbing oil and stuff. It wasn't anything too graphic. The jury was obviously pretty important in the verdict outcome in this case, notably that the jurors who did deliberate didn't convict him of RICO conspiracy, and sexualty verdicts on sex trafficking and RICO conspiracy were the only just verdicts supported by the evidence or rehash all the evidence showing why the government's force, fraud, or coercion arguments at trial were unfounded. Suffice it to say that the jury already weighed the strength of that evidence, and it is not relevant here and should play no role at sentencing. Now, his attorneys argue Diddy and his girlfriends, specifically Cassie and Jane Doe, were all adults when they participated in the Wild King nights or hotel nights or freak-offs. The defense says Combs had serious relationships with those women and were in consensual sexual experiences with adult third parties. And they argue he didn't profit in any way of these hotel nights or freak-offs like a Mann Act defendant typically would. Throughout his trial, drugs were brought up ad nauseum, and this recent court filing was no exception. Diddy's lawyers claim drugs and a high-profile celebrity lifestyle played a role in his conduct. They wrote, without minimizing Mr. Combs' conduct, this is in many ways a sex, drugs, and rock and roll story. Mr. Combs had severe substance abuse problems throughout the entirety of the offense conduct and participated in a high-octane celebrity lifestyle. So did Miss Ventura, independently and not because of Mr. Combs. As for Jane, she willingly took ecstasy and other drugs with Mr. Combs, which became a part of their relationship. Now, during trial, the defense seemingly implied what happened in 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel was due to a bad batch of drugs. But in this new filing, Diddy's defense team says that the Intercontinental Hotel beating of Cassie was a rare time where Combs committed acts of violence during his relationship with Cassie. This despite Cassie herself testifying she couldn't recall how many beatings there were because there were so many. In this recent filing, though, the defense wrote, the violence was not entirely one-sided. However, Ms. Ventura testified there were times when she initiated physical fights with Mr. Combs. On one occasion, for example, she punched Mr. Combs in the face. Mr. Combs, for his part, is the first to exclaim that these acts of domestic violence against Ms. Ventura are inexcusable. But the notion that the violence or coercion had a nexus to freak-offs is not true, as the jury clearly found. Now, part of the reason the judge kept him behind bars pending sentencing was because he admitted to being physically violent with Jane as recently as June of 2024, 3 months before his arrest. Jane testified she started that physical altercation and admitted to throwing things at him, calling him.
everyone was equal, and respect had to be earned in ways he never imagined. He was moved into protective custody immediately after, but even there, the fear lingered. Isolation might have protected him from others, but it couldn't protect him from himself. The silence of his cell was unbearable, the weight of every decision, every mistake, pressed down on him. The man who once built empires with his voice was now screaming into the void, unheard and unseen. Insiders close to his legal team said Diddy began showing signs of panic, paranoia, and breakdown. He's not the same man, one insider revealed. He's restless, pacing, barely eating. He can't sleep. He keeps asking about the appeal, about when he can get out. But even his lawyers knew, appeals take time, and time was something Diddy had too much of now. The attack changed everything. The prison administration put him on a high-security watch list, limiting his movement.
But I make no excuses. My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it. I'm disgusted now. I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy and go into rehab. Had to ask God for his mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. But I'm committed to be a better man each and every day. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry.
2 days after that post, Crystal McKinney filed suit against Diddy, alleging he drugged her and sexually assaulted her back in 2003. All that brings us to September 11th, when singer Dawn Richard filed another civil suit against Diddy, alleging he touched her inappropriately, imprisoned her, and even threatened her life. All this leads us to Monday, September 16th, when Diddy is indicted by a grand jury on federal charges. At about 8:30 that night, he was taken into custody by Homeland Security at the Park Hyatt in New York. The indictment was unsealed on September 17th, charging Diddy with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The court doc details accusations dating back to 2009, alleging Diddy had a pattern of illegal activity over the course of more than a decade. And it's those alleged illegal activities that led us here to this federal indictment. To understand more, we now turn to criminal defense attorney Adam Conta. Okay, so this is a story we've been following for 6 months, more than that. Since the federal raids, we've been kind of seeing this coming, didn't really know when, and now the indictment finally came down. So just at that point, what are your initial thoughts about this indictment?
Well, I mean, I think it's a real problem for him. It lays out what they believe is a pattern of illegal activity, all in the names and the furtherance of the Combs enterprise. I think it lacks some details, but we have, because this is an ongoing investigation and because it's sort of been in the public sphere for a while, we have more details than we normally would. They've laid out a pattern of conspiracy and racketeering that they've charged him with. But part of that is obviously that one of the victims is his ex-girlfriend, Kathy, who filed this major lawsuit last year in November against him. But we kind of have the details from that lawsuit as well. So we can kind of insert those as really the jump off point to how we got here now today.
Limiting his movement and contact with others. But the isolation only amplified his paranoia. Every sound, every echo, every whisper outside his door made him flinch. Guards reported he refused to shower for days. Terrified of being ambushed again, he requested extra protection, extra guards, extra security, but inside prison, there's no such thing as absolute safety. Word of the attack spread outside quickly. News outlets exploded with headlines: Diddy assaulted in prison. Fans were shocked, while critics called it karma. Social media was divided. Some called for justice and better protection. Others said it was the consequence of his own actions. The story dominated every timeline. For years, Diddy had been the one orchestrating the show. Now, he was the headline, the cautionary tale. Inside, his reputation continued to crumble. Guards claimed he tried to use his influence, offering favors and money to those who would listen, but it only made things worse. Every attempt to pull rank reminded the others of who he once was, and who he wasn't anymore. The respect he demanded outside turned into resentment inside. Every privilege, every whisper of favoritism, made him a bigger target.
What has been an onslaught of civil cases against him. In fact, he is facing new allegations every single week. And we told you about Tony Buzbee, this Texas attorney, who announced that he was going to be filing more than 100 individual civil actions against Sean Combs. And he's been true to his word. I mean, so far, Buzbee and his partners have filed more than a dozen of these lawsuits, with many more seemingly looming on the horizon. Combs, though, he's always denied any wrongdoing. Let's be clear about that, both in federal court and in statements released by his attorneys in response to these new civil lawsuits. He's always maintained his innocence. In a statement, a representative for Combs said, Mr. Combs and his legal team have full confidence in the facts, their legal defenses, and the integrity of the judicial process. In court, the truth will prevail that Mr. Combs has never sexually assaulted anyone, adult or minor, man or woman. And when it comes to Tony Buzbee, Sean Combs' team had this to say: the lawyer behind this lawsuit is interested in media attention rather than the truth, as is obvious from his constant press appearances and 1-800 number. As we've said before, Mr. Combs cannot respond to every new publicity stunt, even in response to claims that are facially ridiculous or demonstratively false. And it is important to note, while Combs has settled at least one lawsuit, like the bombshell lawsuit filed by his ex Cassandra Ventura nearly a year ago that started the whole ball rolling with this legal saga, he has not admitted any culpability. While he did apologize on Instagram after the 2016 video of him purportedly beating Cassandra Ventura at a hotel hallway surfaced by CNN. But other than that, look, to be clear, he hasn't been found liable in any court. He hasn't been found guilty of any wrongdoing in any court. So right now, he is presumed innocent. And these are allegations. They're serious allegations, but they're allegations. But having said that, what is being put out there now in the course of these new civil lawsuits is arguably even worse than what we've heard before. It's kind of hard to judge, but let me get into this, because on Monday, Tony Buzbee and his legal partners, they filed a suit against Combs on behalf of a John Doe who lives in California. The lawsuit states, this case seeks compensatory and punitive damages for the drugging and sexual assault of a 10-year-old boy when he met defendant as his LLC, Bad Boy Entertainment LLC, there are more. The complaint reads, on the surface, each of these businesses served a legitimate purpose related to entertainment, music, and other subjects, but in reality, Combs, by and through himself and his agents, employees, and contractors, used these businesses to sexually assault, abuse, threaten, and coerce hundreds of individuals through sexual quid pro quo schemes, as well as to take advantage of individuals with impunity, thinking the victims would never seek recourse. Combs and his agents, employees, and contractors through these Combs businesses would tell victims, this is what it takes to be famous, what are you willing to do to become a star, and perform this sexual act or else, to coerce the victim into performing a non-consensual sexual act for the gratification of Combs and his cohorts. Now again, that is very consistent with
psychologists who've worked with high-profile inmates say Diddy's mental unraveling is inevitable. The combination of isolation, fear, and public humiliation can break even the strongest ego. He's facing something he's never experienced before, complete loss of control. One expert explained, in his world, power was survival. Now, survival means humility, and that's something he never learned. Letters from his family have been his only lifeline. His sons reportedly wrote to him, urging him to stay strong, to keep faith, to fight for his appeal. But even those words can only do so much. Behind bars, faith fades quickly, replaced by reality. Every day feels longer, every hour heavier, and though his legal team continues to fight, even they know, the damage is done. The man who once ruled music, who built empires and commanded rooms, now spends his days confined to a small cell, haunted by memories of everything he's lost. His reflection, once confident and larger than life, now stares back hollow, broken, and unrecognizable. The same eyes that once looked out over million-dollar stages now see only concrete walls.
his parents took plaintiff to the purported audition at a hotel in the same general vicinity as plaintiff's own hotel. The consultant brought plaintiff to Combs' room, but left him with Combs and told plaintiff that she would be back later. Plaintiff recalls other people in the room or area, but he did not know who any of the people were. So here's this claim that a consultant, I don't even know if the proper word is recruit, but facilitated this meeting between this boy and Sean Combs, seemingly convinced the parents that it was okay for him to go alone to meet one of the most famous men in the world at the time. And for anyone, of course, the allure of money and fame, that can be pretty mesmerizing, but especially, I would imagine, for a child. So keep that in mind, 10-year-old child here. The complaint says, quote, plaintiff performed several rap songs for Combs. Combs complimented plaintiff on his rapping and told plaintiff that he could make him a star. Combs asked plaintiff how badly he wanted to be a star and what plaintiff would do to get to be one. Plaintiff responded, as might any 10-year-old child, that he would do anything. So at this point, one of the other people present allegedly gave this boy a soda, and after he drank it, he started to feel, quote, a little funny, but he chalked it up to being maybe just so excited about his opportunity to rap for Sean Combs. But the plaintiff now believes that that soda was drugged with either GHB, known as the date rape drug, or ecstasy, or maybe even both. And that's interesting because, again, it's not Combs accused of giving a drug drink to an alleged victim. It's one of his employees or associates or friends. people who were involved in something that likely didn't appear to be above board and yet did it anyway. That person, although to be clear, is not named in the complaint. The complaint says, quote, after plaintiff consumed his soda and began feeling its effects, Combs told plaintiff to move closer to him, which plaintiff did. Combs then abruptly pushed plaintiff down and said words to the effect of, you have to do some stuff you don't want to do sometimes. Now, the next part of the complaint is just incredibly graphic. I'm not going to repeat it here, but essentially John Doe claims that Combs sexually assaulted him and then he lost consciousness. 10 years old. Quote, when plaintiff awoke, he began crying immediately. Plaintiff's pants were undone, and then he says that his private areas hurt badly. Combs was still present. Plaintiff cried that he wanted to go to his mom and dad. Combs replied that if plaintiff told anyone about what had happened, he would hurt plaintiff's mom and dad badly. Upon plaintiff's return, his parents immediately noticed that he was lethargic and acting differently. Although plaintiff ultimately told his parents what happened, plaintiff and his parents were terrified of the potential consequences of reporting the abuse. I want to focus on that point real quick because assuming these allegations are true, some might say, how could you not report this to the police? Your child gets attacked. I don't care who the person is. You go to the police. The other way of looking at it is, and this is a big theme that makes its way into these lawsuits and even the criminal case.
Still, somewhere in that silence, there's a flicker of defiance left in him. Diddy has always been a survivor. He's clawed his way out of impossible situations before. He's reinvented himself time and time again. But this is different. This isn't a PR scandal. This isn't a business rival. This is the fight for his soul, the battle for his sanity, and the one war he can't control with fame or fortune. The question now isn't whether Diddy can survive prison, it's whether he can survive himself. The world outside has already moved on. New artists, new headlines, new scandals. But inside, time stands still. Every day is a reminder of who he was, what he did, and what he's become. For Diddy, the empire is gone, the fame is gone, the illusion is gone. All that's left is the man behind the mask, facing the consequences of a life lived without limits. And as the prison gates close each night, the echoes of the world he once ruled fade a little more, leaving behind nothing but the sound of a fallen empire, and a man who finally realizes that the cost of power was far greater than he ever imagined.
Well, I mean, a lot of it from what it sounds like, and again, we're learning all this in real time, but it sounds like from him. I mean, once the police caught wind of Cassie's lawsuit and really started going forward in investigating him, that obviously led to the raids that took place in March in his Miami homes and his LA homes. And when they raided those homes, they found not just guns, not just drugs, but electronic devices, which is really ultimately what they were looking for there. Everything else that I just named is sort of like a cherry on top because what they wanted, what they were looking for, and what they got was hard drives. And on those hard drives, allegedly, are some of these acts being videotaped and taping them without their consent, potentially, holding on to them without their consent, potentially. But aside from those issues, which may or may not exist, they also may lay out a pattern of abuse. They might show abusive behavior. They might show unwanted narcotic consumption or sex that had been denied and then sort of forced upon. We just don't know yet. But I think a lot of the evidence, especially for those older cases, may come from his own recordings.
Going back to those federal raids where we got those recordings, or the feds, I should say, rather, got those recordings, it's been 6 months since then. So, I mean, half a year that Diddy could have guessed potentially these indictments are coming down against him. What was his team doing to prepare? I mean, I'm sure that they were trying to prepare for whatever could be brought against them, but what do you think was happening?
I think they were trying to coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office, be as cooperative as possible while trying to achieve their ultimate goal, which was not getting prosecuted at all. So, yes, they absolutely knew this was coming. Today is not a surprise to Diddy. Today is not a surprise to Diddy's lawyers. But in the meantime, leading up to this, there's been a lot of, I'm sure there's been meetings, I'm sure there's been discussions, I'm sure there's been a lot done to try to avoid this very moment, to show that any of these incidents were either consensual or that they just lacked any sort of criminality. And so, I think that the legal team has probably been working on this since before March, probably since November. They could see something like this potentially coming. And so I'm sure that he's had a team of people looking to avoid this day specifically for a long time. but it was just, I think, inevitable with the amount of evidence that seems like is out there.
So that's the defense side of things, but this half a year time frame, maybe more than that, also is what the prosecution had to kind of build their case against Diddy. So that lengthy time frame, do you think that was helpful for them, that they were kind of doing the same thing he was?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. They were doing much more, I'm sure, because the feds don't bring a case unless they already know that they can prove it. That's just
Imagined. Because this isn't just about one man's fall from grace, it's about what happens when power goes unchecked, when ego replaces empathy, when the illusion of invincibility meets the cold reality of consequence. Diddy once said he could never be stopped, that no one could bring him down, but now, as he stares at the walls closing in around him, as he feels the weight of time pressing down, he knows the truth: the world didn't stop him, he stopped himself. And that's the hardest sentence of all, not the years behind bars, not the silence, not the fear, but the realization that this was always coming. The empire was built on sand, and it was only a matter of time before the tide washed it away. Now, behind those prison walls, Diddy faces the one thing he's avoided his entire life: himself. No entourage, no spotlight, no escape, just the echo of his own past. And the haunting question that follows him everywhere he goes: what's left when the music stops?